In the early 2010s, we saw the rise of multiple figures in hip-hop that stood the test of time and maintain relevancy to this day. Artists like A$AP Rocky, Drake, J. Cole, Pusha T, and even Tyler the Creator released several projects during that era and were able to influence the next wave of artists that followed. But one groundbreaking project from that time ushered in arguably one of the greatest rappers of all time, and that was Good Kid Maad City by Kendrick Lamar. Now, many of you are already likely aware of this project's impact on the scene. As of 2026, it's achieved the Diamond certification. Almost every song on the project has over 100 million streams, with Money Trees alone having over 2 billion, and it infamously got snubbed at the 2013 Grammys by Macklemore. Terrible foresight from the Grammys. But this video isn't solely going to be a Good Kid Maad City breakdown, as there's already plenty of videos about that. Instead, it'll be centered around the immediate influence of this project on the artists that came up alongside Kendrick, to see what the real-time effects of its release was on the culture at the time. For consistency's sake, we'll be looking at albums that all dropped in 2014, roughly 2 years after Kendrick released his debut album, which should give us a good idea about its immediate impact. Starting off with our first album on the list, which is none other than, drumroll please, Logic's Under Pressure. Now, before you click off this video because I'm talking about Logic in the Big 26, just hold on a second. Despite the negative discourse surrounding him, whether it's because you don't vibe with his music or you just find him a bit cringy, one thing that most people can agree on is that he's a student of the game. From emulating Andre 3000's flows, to imitating A Tribe Called Quest's plot devices, to even throwing down heavy punchlines like Big L, his boom bap influences are far from few, cultivating in his debut album Under Pressure, which had a lot to offer to fans by essentially being an amalgamation of his career up until that point, filled with plenty of social commentary and subjects relating to his incremental progress in the rap industry over sample-driven 90s hip-hop beats. But where do the Good Kid Maad City influences lie? In hip-hop, it's common to hear artists avoid structuring their albums around core ideas that are consistently expressed throughout each song. Whether that's due to an attempt to appease a wide variety of listeners, or feeling compelled to make the most abstract music and avoid conforming to the status quo. Typically, these traits are spotted in the early stages of an artist's career, striving to gather as much attention as possible and form a core audience. But Logic's debut rejected these philosophies and instead comprised of music that was true to his personality and beliefs. This meant that those who tuned in and stuck around were likely to become a part of Logic's core audience, and most likely considered Logic to be one of the most talented, authentic MCs to come out of the blog era. That's the power of making it as a conscious, relatable rapper, a higher probability of gaining lifelong fans, which is precisely what Kendrick accomplished twofold by the time Good Kid Maad City came out, meaning Logic coinciding his strategy with Kendrick's becomes a major factor in the discourse surrounding his success. Not to mention, he directly ripped the exact same sample chop off of Good Kid Maad City's most ambitious song, Sing About Me I'm Dying of Thirst, and used it in an oddly questionable manner. Coming in at the tail end of Under Pressure, which also happens to be the song's name in this case, Logic's in the midst of concluding his debut album with a song that revolves around bouncing between each one of his close family members' point of view regarding his rising stardom, and ends the song with a verse of him coming to terms with the instability of his current state and hopes that things can get better in the future. Bear in mind, he uses the same Billy Withers sample chop throughout his verses. It's damn near the same song. In case you forgot, Kendrick raps from other people's perspectives on Sing About Me, and it's deep in reflection about the commotion that Compton residents can't escape. Then Kendrick closes it out with a verse rationalizing his urges to be a voice for those suffering in his community for the sole purpose of survival. Logic just made a worse version of the same song, and don't start with no paying homage nonsense. Anyways, I hope that brief overview of Under Pressure gave you some insight regarding the landscape of hip-hop back in 2014, and how the scene responded to a youngish Kendrick sweeping the competition. But there's one rapper that might not have entirely agreed with that sentiment back in 2014, and it's none other than... Looking back, 2014 Forest Hill Drives was a major defining moment for J. Cole's career. Prior to its release, Cole embodied multiple rapper tropes from the early 2010s era in an attempt to appeal to hip-hop heads and casual rap fans alike. Coupled with support from Jay-Z via Roc Nation, Cole eventually garnered mass attention and attracted a large audience, akin to his record label owner's success in the previous decade. With his last project on his Roc Nation contract, Born Sinner, Cole achieved widespread commercial success, with pop rap records like Power Trip and She Knows Cole had really cemented himself as a reputable mainstream rapper. Simultaneously, he also earned his stripes amongst traditionalists who appreciated his boom bap sound and his clever wordplay. In order to play his cards right in the future, Cole would have to work out how he could please these two fan bases and evolve artistically. He also likely would have felt a sense of urgency when it came to accomplishing this, as the early 2010s was a large transitional moment within hip-hop, with several new artists breaking out and establishing their craft, with a major artist being Kendrick Lamar. As Cole was already being widely recognized for his talent as an MC by the time Good Kid Maad City came out, it wasn't necessary for him to directly match Kendrick when it came to his approach or sonics. But with hip-hop's roots being tied to a competitive spirit, one could argue that Forest Hill Drive was created to be placed in direct competition with Good Kid Maad City. With no features, conscious adjacent tracks tied with commercial appeal, and a growth in maturity and self-awareness, Cole demonstrated he had the star power deserving of a seat with the big players. Ask yourself, if Good Kid Maad City never came out, would Cole have felt comfortable enough dialing in his strongest individual traits as an artist on a single LP? Don't let the humble demeanor fool you either. Cole wanted that acclaim. On January 28th, Cole name drops both Drake and Kendrick, and on the same verse compares himself to Rakim, whom he shares a birthday with, January 28th, and proclaims that he's the equivalent as Rakim was in the late 80s as a modern day rap god, not Drake or Kendrick. However, this sentiment didn't really land with the culture and was seen more as an inconspicuous shot at Kendrick, confirming that the humble, conscious persona that Cole honed in on throughout Forest Hill Drive made a large enough impact on listeners to consider him as one of the greats of that generation, alongside Kendrick. So up until this point, we've looked at emotional resonance and the direct influence of Good Kid Maad City on Logic, impact on the culture with Cole, and finally, to wrap things up, we'll look at the influence of the outstanding production on Good Kid Maad City by analysing an album that you could definitively say was influenced by Kendrick, and that's none other than YG's My Crazy Life. At the time of its release, YG wasn't really known that well to the masses, and My Crazy Life was a giant step forward compared to his previous music. Coming up in the blog era, YG's earlier mixtapes were what you'd expect from an up-and-coming Compton native MC. Raw, street, gritty, and plenty of bounce to go along with it. But when discussing My Crazy Life as a whole, it'd be unjust to give YG all of the acclaim for its success, as it can easily be considered an unofficial rapper-producer collab tape with LA native DJ Mustard. When it comes to recognizable drum patterns, signature percussion sounds, and an iconic producer tag, Mustard undoubtedly has all of those bases covered. Encompassing these traits allowed him to stand out from the saturated producer scene that was overtly present during the blog era. Pairing with YG also marked a pivotal moment in his career, as he demonstrated he could use his signature producing techniques to assist YG in developing his brash and lively sound, including sonics such as dark, eerie synths that match the sinister street vibes, which are contrasted with heavy bass lines and drums carrying a lot of bounce for listeners to enjoy at the club. Outside of the obvious West Coast connection between YG, Mustard, and Lamar, My Crazy Life and Good Kid Maad City both form a cohesive whole greater than the sum of its individual songs, i.e. they're both concept albums. In Good Kid Maad City's case, it's a story about the experience of a young black adolescent trying to make sense of growing up in a chaotic and dangerous society, whereas My Crazy Life is set in the same environment, but it's portrayed through the perspective of those troubled youths causing all the violence and chaos. Furthermore, both projects contain key production techniques that correspond with one another and are integral for pushing the narrative forward. For example, many songs on My Crazy Life conveniently end in a skit, whether that be a voicemail, an altercation, or even a robbery gone south. For example, the track 1am starts off by YG detailing his reckless antics as a youth, which then transitions into a depiction of the time he stuck up a donut stand for $1,000. However, as a byproduct of greed and street politics, a shootout takes place between the bandits, which results in YG's arrest, as indicated in the outro skit. Then the next track, Thank God, follows the story in chronological order, filled with regret and betrayal from YG's point of view as he's locked up in the system facing multiple years behind bars. Along with that, his close friend sends a heartfelt voicemail disguised as a verse to YG's mother, recounting the events that took place. The main difference between how YG and Kendrick used transitional skits pertains to their respective narrative structures, as Good Kid Maad City followed a non-linear format, which gave Kendrick more abstract freedom towards album sequencing. The legacy of Good Kid Maad City goes far beyond these 20 2014 albums, as it's widely considered one of the greatest concept albums of all time. From the beats to the backstory, from the bravado on Backstreet Freestyle to the heartache on Sing About Me, Kendrick won fans all over the world. Many artists from all over the world decades later would still continue to source inspiration from this album, including the likes of Denzel Curry, JID, IDK, and countless others. It's more than likely its influence will trickle down to future generations, as discourse surrounding the album's themes and context remains prevalent and will most likely never fully fade away.